Hello, welcome to the very second episode of the Down the Rabbit Hole podcast with Rob Wall. Today, I'm very excited to present my sponsor, Ty S.
Hey, how's it going, guys?
So, we were just discussing, like what we could talk about on today's podcast, and we came up with the idea of self-discovery.
Self-discovery is a good one. You're cool if I vape while I do this?
Yeah,
I feel
yeah.
like it wouldn't be an AA topical type meeting, spiritual meeting without some kind of cigarette or vape or
Yeah, by all means.
coffee, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Self-discovery through the steps is something we were kind of talking about a little bit, but it's in large, I feel like, for the individual in recovery, not just myself, but for the individual, for the people that I've seen go through this program and been able to meet. It's one thing I don't think I really thought about a lot when I was trying to get quote-unquote sober. Because at the beginning, I mean, it's just like all you want to do is stop using. You want to stop drinking. I'm not even thinking about the journey that you're going to eventually go on just inherently by doing steps. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So self-discovery was never really the goal at the beginning.
Yeah.
I just want to stop.
Yeah.
And I can't. So, I mean, for me, because I don't want to tell somebody else's story, and I'm never going to out somebody else's story, but for me, I think the biggest one for me was figuring out in the beginning, like, the power greater than myself, is that something that I truly believe in from like a conceptual point of view, or is that just something that I was using as a placeholder for my faults and failures? And that journey is through self-discovery in finding a power greater than myself. I think that kind of started that whole transition.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I was just thinking about is, like, before we ever seek to figure out who we are, the first thing we have to do is figure out who we don't want to be anymore.
Right.
Right? So, it's very easy to identify with our thoughts and our behaviors that keep us suffering and keep us sick, Yeah. So, I mean, in the case of alcoholism and addiction and stuff, like the use and the drinking in itself is causing us so much pain at the end that we're finally like willing to let go of that. But you got to figure we were identified with that forever.
Yeah, and I would literally, just as you were saying, I was thinking like alcohol and drugs was my identity for a long time. So like really what I'm suffering from is an identity crisis, right?
Yeah.
I have this identity crisis where I have this thing that I've been pouring my life into, that I've been, as the book describes it, worshiping this king alcohol or king drugs, whatever. And, I've been a citizen of his denizen realm, of this mad realm. And I don't know how to be anything other than that. And the first time somebody asked me, and it was actually my wife before she became my wife, she asked me what I thought was a weird question, which was, we were just talking one day, and she went, yeah, I was just wondering, like, what do you value?
Wow.
And I was like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
What do you mean, what do I value?
Well, that's not a question you hear very often these days.
I guess not, but I mean, for her, it just rolled off the tongue like it was something that she just talked about in normal, everyday conversations. And I'm like, this is not something I'm used to even thinking about, and I struggle with it. I struggled with it for like a good 5 minutes before she stepped back in. She was like, "Well, I think you value loyalty. I think that's something that you value." Just looking at how I operate in the workplace, how I operate outside of the workplace, like with my friends and stuff like that. So that particular question really opened the door to a lot more questions.
Yeah.
And that was like, I don't know, I want to say maybe like 2.5 years in, maybe 3 years, I think 2.5 years in at that point. And I was like, there's all these questions that either normal people or people that are like introspective spiritual people ask themselves that I'd never thought to ask myself.
Yeah,
one time.
I think there's a pitfall though that we can sometimes fall into when it comes to the values, because oftentimes what we value, we have this bad habit of tying our self-worth to the things that we value, you know? So like one of the things that was instilled in me as a value as a kid, you know, was hard work.
Yeah.
You know, because I come from like a hard working pro-totalitarian kind of family, and
Ditto.
yeah, and so you know, a lot of my self-worth is tied into my work ethic, you know, and so that's a dangerous road to walk, because it's like, you know, if somebody starts to like make you doubt your work ethic, like if a superior in the workplace or something is making you feel unappreciated, as can often happen, you know, very quickly that turns into like a very bitter, resentful type of experience, because, you know, it's like not only are they doubting your work ethic, but it's like because you're so identified with that value, it's like they're doubting you as a person, you know, and that's not an easy thing to swallow there. So
and I think in talking about the subject today, like self-discovery, knowing what you value, I think here's what really helped me when I was thinking about identity, was, I don't remember what I was reading, but it was some kind of spiritualist literature. And it was like, who you are and identifying who you are isn't tied to how much you produce or what you produce. It ties more into the individual's, I feel like I'm trying to paraphrase this, but like the individual's just being. Like, how are you as a being? What are the things that drive you in your spiritual life? And those things are your identifiers. When you're talking about, again, bringing up higher powers again, like what attributes of your higher power are you adapting? And in that way, becoming more like that particular higher powers, I don't know what I would equate it to, but just that like schema of your higher power. And in that, you're able to take attributes of yourself and be more at peace with those things that maybe make you uncomfortable, maybe those things that are things that maybe you don't like about yourself, but like right now, like the me that used to be like a liar, that still comes up every now and then, where I'll think, oh, well, this is an uncomfortable situation, and I'll just like white lie my way out of this. But like that's a reaction to how things used to be in my life. So do I still identify as a liar, or am I trying to do work to change it? And I think that goes along with self-discovery.
yeah,
When you're trying to talk about the things that are inherent. And I think we're getting into a little bit of character defect work and shortcoming work and stuff like that when we talk about that. Because there's all these learned behaviors. There's all these, what I think books like Drop the Rock talk about, these things that kind of were around to help preserve us and our ego, but also like on a primal level, like I'm just trying to be okay.
Yeah.
Doing what I'm doing. So my mind and my ego create these thought patterns and things that maybe now aren't useful, but they were useful then because they kind of shielded and protected like my very delicate psyche at the time from experiencing like abnormal amounts of pain.
Yeah, I think there's like the 5 Fs of the fear response or something. I don't know if I can remember all of them. It's like fear, or flee, fight, feed, fornicate, and then I can't remember the other one. But yeah,
I don't know if I've ever heard those.
Yeah, but it makes sense.
Yeah,
it's
it
like
does.
kind of exactly what you're talking about here. Because I think you're absolutely right. Like our character defects are defense mechanism to a fear response. You know, and it is primal because it's our defense mechanism. It's how our species has progenerated and made it through the ages. Is when there's something that we're perceiving as a threat, we we react with ultra speed and we do whatever it takes to survive. But the problem is we've evolved so much over the years that we have this way higher ability to abstract ideas than we used to. And so we abuse this ancient system in our brain, you know what I mean? So like, you know, when we were living in the jungles and stuff like that, you know, it's like our main threats were, you know, predators. But nowadays it's like we're the apex, you know what I mean? There's nothing that's hunting us, so we perceive threats in a very abstract way.
And very differently.
Yeah, so if somebody's like, you know, making us feel financially insecure, like if a boss or something is making us feel threatened, like maybe we'll lose our job and that's our livelihood and that's how we survive, or at least that's what we say to ourselves, you know what I mean? Now all of a sudden we're perceiving that as a threat and reacting accordingly, you know?
I think when you're talking about that, now we're getting into like this realm of like emotional trigger responses, right? Which is a whole different like psychological like in-depth study, I'm sure, that could be we could do a whole nother series on probably like emotional style triggers or trauma responses, as I've heard it referred to as well.
Yeah.
Because we don't have this immediate imminent threat of like, you know, my life is going to be no more. And now that has transferred itself into the emotional realm. Instead of it being a physical realm, it's now an emotional realm. But I mean, like getting away from that a little bit, just because like I feel like we could dive off the deep end with that. Self-discovery. I want to come back to it, and I'm going to say the word self-discovery a lot. I do believe that the steps are laid out in such a way that it's, and I think I'm just like hearkening back to something I said right at the beginning. It's configured into the steps in a way that really there's no avoidance of it. Like there's no avoidance of self-discovery. I think at a certain point, it just you're asking yourself, how deep in self-discovery do you want to go? Well, yeah. And how healthy or unhealthy does that depth of knowledge like go? Like, because I have immense like sexual traumas that if I try to dive into all those traumas right off the rip, you know, that may not be the healthiest way for me to go about those certain parts of myself that I could rediscover and try to make peace with. Yeah. But in the same realm, when we're talking about more on the spiritual side of things, asking myself questions about the certain activities and ways that I interact with people, those were the biggest tells and the biggest revelations for me, is how I was interacting with the people about me. Because, like, in a way, I had worked in kitchens, I had worked in the music industry, and, like, there's a certain amount of speech, there's a certain way to interact with your fellows about you, and, you know, as much as it's socially accepted in those places to act a certain way, it's not healthy. I can say that from my perspective, it wasn't healthy. I would get yelled at all the time, or I would just be messed up all the time, and the authority figures above me would berate me and all this stuff. And it was just, for me, it was just clocking in. You're just clocking in at that point, because there's no one to tell you that's wrong. Like, that's probably a very unhealthy habit, or it could down the line cause you some sort of like, again, like mental trauma or, you know, emotional response in the way that I react to other people telling me information. But because I'm so sensitive to somebody's criticism, bam, smack. Yeah. I'm right there in that fight or flight response. Yeah. And I'm either gonna like try to claw my way out or shut down completely.
Yeah. So now you're touching on exactly like where my mind was going. It's like you're never gonna discover anything about yourself unless you take the mask off. Right, and that's just kind of a scary process, because we can become quite used to the mask, and honestly, I think if you wear a mask for long enough, like you kind of sort of just envelop it. You know what I mean? And you lose track of what was part of the persona to begin with, and what was like really there underneath it all. You know, and so a part of that, I think, is is definitely ego related.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because it's like if you're still in that like people pleasing type of behavior, you know, then you're probably gonna act accordingly. You know, and you're not gonna maybe do the stuff that you would do deep down. You know, if you weren't looking for approval.
Yeah. And just as a disclaimer for the people that maybe have a misunderstanding of ego is a double-sided coin. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I wish somebody had brought this up to me a long time ago. Ego is a double-sided coin. It's not just pride and feeling like I'm better than everybody else. The flip side of ego is self-deprecation, that I'm not as good as everybody else, that I'm a piece of crap, that I'm not worth the ground I stand on. And that is something that I feel like is a very not integral, but something that's a connective tissue between me and the next alcoholic. I feel like most alcoholics or addicts that I meet, on some level, maybe an extreme level or not as extreme as me, but there's self-deprecation. There's an entire spectrum of self-deprecation.
Yeah, I like to look at ego as the story that we tell ourselves. That's where the story we're telling ourselves comes from, is from the ego, and it assigns value to things, and that's why they say like it's a program of ego deflation, right? That doesn't just mean that we're like letting go of pride. Of course, we have to do that. That's key. But like when in my mind at least, when they say ego deflation, that means like the story we're telling ourselves is no longer the ultimate truth. We're starting to take that story that's always going to be there. That doesn't go away. Now we can diminish it a little bit, right? By learning that oftentimes the story we're telling ourselves is delusional. Yeah. And that's human nature. That's not like specific to alcoholics and addicts. Like everybody runs on delusions, you know. But you know, as that deflates, we're starting to learn that like oftentimes we're wrong. You know, it's like humility. We start to get humility, and that's when I think we get the most growth. You know, because when we can put that stuff to the side, the stuff that we're telling ourselves, and kind of listen to other people and get some feedback from a few different sources and kind of like really weigh it out. You know, that's when we can start putting ourselves in situations that we would have never ended up in, you know, because, you know, a broken mind can't, you know, it's like the mind that created the problem can't think its way out of it, yeah, you know?
Which is why we need other people's help.
Yeah.
Other people in which the problem has seemingly been solved, as they say. And egocentric, the word used in the book, egocentric, is, I think, in conjunction with everything that you're saying, it is both sides. It is saying that not only do I... what do they say in the rooms? They say, I'm a egomaniac with an inferiority complex.
Yeah.
Right. And that's egocentrism. Is like, I'm either on one end of the spectrum or the other. Yeah. I'm either super high on myself or I'm super low on myself.
Yeah, and another thing I always say is there's very rarely a middle ground. So it's like I either want to be the best, or if I can't be the best, I want to be the best at being the worst.
Exactly. Makes so much sense. I don't know. I wish that this process that we undergo had more intentional conversations about that. I'm lucky enough that sponsorship families that I've had have really kind of dived into the more, I guess, psychological part of things. And I've done a lot of research on my own as well, like talking to other people is what I'm saying, like talking to other people and hearing their experiences and finding that connective tissue. Because I would be remiss if I didn't say this, especially for my home group members, but sometimes I like to think that I'm a special kind of special that deserves special treatment on special occasions. And, if I didn't say that, I'd get in trouble. Yep. But the ego deflation has everything to do with taking those parts of your story that we can't differentiate the true from the false, and stepping them off to the side. What I believe goes off to the side, and in its place taking new ideas and new perspectives and what we call psychic changes.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I've been trying to experiment with recently is like some of the videos I've been doing on 12 Rules for Life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like
Jordan Peterson.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson talks a lot about dominance hierarchy and how they've always existed and everything like that. And so, like our brains are kind of wired that way. And so like even in my workplace, there's a dominance hierarchy and I'm on it somewhere. Maybe sometimes my perception of my placement within that hierarchy can be delusional sometimes, but like I'm definitely not on the bottom of it by any means. And although I would say more towards the bottom than the top for sure, but regardless, I'm not on the bottom. And so one of the things that I've been experimenting with recently, like in the workplace, is when somebody that I perceive as below me makes a suggestion to me, I've been trying to take it, even though I never would have done that in the past, because it's like I'll take a suggestion from somebody higher up because most of the time for self-seeking motives. It's not so much that I think this is a great idea and that I'm happy to do it. It's more along the lines of like, oh, I want to make this guy happy because I'm trying to move up the hierarchy. You know what I mean? So, but I've been taking suggestions from like everybody, and it's been working out relatively well for me. One thing that I've noticed is that when I let go of like some of the ambition, the really strong ambitions that drive me in the workplace, I tend to enjoy the job a little bit more, which as a byproduct of it makes me kind of a little bit more effective at the job itself, And I see people that I work with, that I'm friends with all the time, that have that old mind state that they just want to rise up the ladder. They want to through their own will power and and it's just like what I see mostly is them just stressing themselves out and driving themselves crazy and like reducing their efficiency.
Are you talking about me, Rob?
No, but I'm sure it applies because dude, I could slip back into it at any given moment, but. And that's the other thing, when you were talking earlier, something that popped into my mind is so many people chase success.
Oh, yeah.
And that's flawed. It's putting the cart before the horse, or whatever they say, because success is a byproduct of other things, other attributes, and it's a byproduct of efficiency, for example. And so, like, in order to be efficient, you need to organize your mind in a certain way. And I think that's where, the program starts to get very practical. Yeah. Because it's like when you're running on self-will, right? When you're running on character defects and trying to control everything and like arrange it just as you see fit, thinking that you know best, it never works out. It causes you great stress, and then your efficiency goes way down. And so when you start to like really learn how to turn things over and you stop trying to take control of things, it frees you up to kind of take situations as they come with relative ease and peace of mind and serenity, and you can really become way more efficient that way. And as a byproduct of that, you just start to be kind of a little bit more successful in your endeavors.
That's true. And and the reason I think I said, like, are you talking about me, is because I mean, like, I'm a workaholic in every sense of the word. Like, I feel like for the past 6.5 plus years I've been sober, that's how I dealt with a lot of my own issues, which hindered me from finding that and being a part of discovering myself. Because if I could just drown myself in work, or if I can just find this one goal that is like something tangible that I can reach out, I can touch, I can have it, that would make me feel whole inside. And it didn't. And I've been doing the job that I've been doing for a long time, and now I'm in a place where you were just talking about. I'm now in a place of authority in my job. So I'm constantly having to reevaluate the way that I'm viewing things. I mean, literally, just before we started this podcast, I got a text message on my phone from a subordinate, and it wasn't one that I wanted. And I immediately got frustrated, and you saw it. I got frustrated because the plans that I had created in my mind were solidified in a way that I felt like I didn't have to deal with any more problems at that point. And life doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way in the workplace, and it doesn't work that way out in the world in general. Like, things are always going to come up, and it's your reaction to those things that really are the kind of the test of whether or not you're taking that initial time to breathe, to pray about it, to possibly call someone else, and spitball these ideas, and then turning your attention to somebody that you could possibly do something for. Again, the big three is what I call it in the big book. Those big three ideas that are supposed to help to rearrange our thought processes and bring us back to a nominal spot where we can think clearly. And a lot of times when I get upset, I can't think clearly. I can't think clearly at all. And then I make poor decisions, whether that be yelling at a coworker or getting upset with my spouse when I come home, because I have these things in life that I'm still trying to control, and I haven't relinquished control because I say, God, you got the drinking, you've got the drugs, that's fine, you can have that part. But I'm going to keep this. This is mine now. You know what I mean? This is mine. Don't touch this.
Well, that's because we're still identified with that
exactly
stuff. And so to bring it full circle, it's back to that like lack of self-discovery.
Yep.
Because I used to do the same thing, especially when it came to lust. It's like, all right, I've given you a lot, God, but like I'm going to keep a hold of this one because, in my mind, it's like I'm not going to give my sex life over to God.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like that just felt weird to even say, So it's like... I hung on to that for so long, and it was, and as the longer I held on to it, the more identified I became with it, because it was like that one vice, if you will, that like really got the blood flow, and with the absence of alcohol and drugs, obviously. So,
what helped you? I'm going to take over this podcast. What helped you to get over or to make changes in your life in that arena?
Well, you repeat the same pattern for long enough, and eventually you can't ignore it anymore. Or I guess you could, but the cost of ignoring it is just going up exponentially. So in the beginning you're pretty much blind to it, and so ignorance is bliss. But then you make some pretty devastating choices, and it comes back to bite you in the ass, and so you start to realize after some time, like, okay, this is because I continue to behave like this. And so, I went on way longer than most people would probably, and way longer in this particular arena when it comes to lust. I went on way longer with this part than I went on in a lot of the other bad habits that I picked up along the way too. Because this one is, we're talking about a need here, because it's like that desire to procreate is, part of our instinct. And so, I've had long conversations about this with like therapists and stuff. Like it's a tricky one because, when it comes to alcohol and drugs, you can lock that away in a cage and never touch it again, hopefully. But when it comes to things like overeating or like sex, things like that, those are really tricky because it's not like you could just like abstain from that stuff forever.
Yeah.
Not realistically, at least. Definitely not eating.
And not that it would be healthy at all to do so.
Yeah.
Even the book says that our desires are God-given.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or, given by our higher power, you got these desires. And desires for a person, and it was so funny, I was just talking about this last night with another person. Desires are very interesting things because they're the most beautiful things that in the world that could create a passion in somebody and such a positive force in our lives. But in the misuse of desires or in the non-recognition of desires taking over and become a motivating factor to abuse or misuse certain things. Because I know, I'm an overeater, dude. I overeat all the time. If you could see, I got this big old belly, my sobriety belly, I call it.
Yeah.
But I mean, at a certain point, you got to do an ROI. You got to do an ROI, a return on investment.
Yeah.
on these things, and that's why coming back to doing an inventory, just like segueing from it, doing an inventory is the best way to ROI yourself. Your return on investment is the things that I am coming into contact with in my life. Holding on to them, is Is it better for self-discovery that I keep holding on to them, or is it not? Are the things that I'm doing, my defects and my shortcomings, is it better that I hold on to them or not? You can easily take a look at those things with a sponsor, on the sheet of paper. Even as you're writing it, I feel like you start to really gain an idea of like the toxicity of holding on to resentments or holding on to different reactions and ways of being. The question becomes after that is like, okay, how do I let these things go in a way where it's healthy and helpful?
Yeah. Well, to kind of go back to the question you asked me, like when I finally did kind of like make progress in all that, what I learned a valuable lesson, and so when it came to relationships, specifically like romantic relationships, I had some terrible luck, and I was definitely caught up in some toxic relationships when I was in my like early 20s and stuff like that. And one thing that I can say is, on the subject of grief, I've had death, from people close to me, and it was devastating for sure. And I've had some other tragedy happen in my life, but for some reason, the betrayal of a lover, right? Like the deterioration of a relationship with a romantic partner that you love dearly, that to me always hit the hardest.
Right.
That was because like maybe like a death might impact me stronger initially, but then like it's like eventually you get you go through the process of grief, and then you kind of come to some closure. But like a lot of times with the failed relationships, especially if I felt strongly about that person, that really just affected me for so long, and then the followed me. The ghost of that relationship followed me into the next relationship and the next relationship, and like it was really, it like kind of shook me to the core. And so grief, and heartbreak, I'll really call it, heartbreak really was like my kryptonite, and when I finally started to take a hard look at my behavior, like my lust and my motivation behind getting into relationships in the first place, and like what was I really looking for in a relationship, when I really started to take a hard look at all that, things did start to change. And so I got into a relationship, and you were already sponsoring me at this point, but it was relatively early on. And for the first time, like I didn't just jump into bed with somebody, and I was trying to do the right thing, and I carried myself to the best of my ability. Lord knows I wasn't perfect, but like to the best of my ability, I tried to do the right thing throughout the entire relationship, from the very beginning to the very end. And at the end, the relationship failed, and there was a little bit of a betrayal in there, like there was some cheating and stuff like that. And like the craziest thing happened. That heartbreak was just like, it was like a dull ache. It didn't like shatter me into a million pieces like it had done so many times in the past. And I walked away from that relationship with my head held high, because I knew that like for the first time I could say that like I was legitimately a good person throughout that entire relationship. And when it failed, it was like I felt sorry for them, because they weren't ready to reciprocate that. And so I wasn't the one who was losing out. It was them, because you kind of reap what you sow, and you attract a certain type of person. And so and hopefully not, but maybe they might be very well doomed to repeat that pattern until they learn from it, just like I was. But when I walked away from that with my head held high, within like 2 weeks I was like kind of back to normal, and it didn't take very long to like move on and do the next thing. So that was definitely a powerful experience and all that.
I remember you going through that and seeing the way that you held yourself, and I was very encouraged by that, because I was looking at you doing that for yourself, because I knew that was an area you struggled in, and I said, oh, if he can do that, I can do that in some other facets of my life too. And that's where like the sponsorship relationship is totally just wiles me out when I think about it. Because we hear like, oh, the sponsor gains way more from the sponsee than the sponsee does, and in a variable way, it absolutely does, because I see the program again working in someone else's life, and it makes me relive the moments of which it worked in my life, and it's just this beautiful symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. Well, I will say this, as a sponsor, right, who has a little bit more time under their belt and their life is a little bit more stable, you'd be hard pressed to have the same amount of motivation as a sponsee who's like running for their life still.
Yeah, it becomes so insidious. The longer I get in this, the more insidious this disease gets in penetrating my thought process and trying to shape my ideas to break down the work that I've done with the help of AA and my higher power and all this different stuff in my life and whatnot. Yeah, man, it's wild. So it's even more important to try to find those things that ground you in truth versus the lies that my brain makes up, because it's centered in my mind.
Yeah.
Centered there.
So as far as like the actual journey to self-discovery goes, is there anything that you found that you really, really enjoy in sobriety that you never had given a try previously?
I mean, like, I never really truly connected with people. I think that was the biggest one. Because I was so busy trying to get them to do what I wanted. You know what I mean? That connecting with people really, really helped me to be able to come to a place where I felt more at peace with all the noise going on in my mind. Like, it wasn't just me that it was happening to. And that can take an immense amount of pressure off you and allow you to explore other avenues of your spirituality, whether it be meditation, prayer, intensive reading, journaling, like whatever it is, drawing, playing music.
Yeah, I was thinking that too, like creativity.
Yeah.
You know, like I never considered myself a creative person at all, but I'm finding myself really discovering that part of me that was kind of like hidden away for a lot of years. You know, I've been writing a lot, even making the videos and stuff like that has been sort of like a creative experience for me. And so, you know, I've been thriving in that, you know, like in like rediscovering and reinventing myself. And that's kind of like a cool concept too, is like we get to reinvent ourselves, you know, because, you know, it's completely reasonable to say that you don't know who you are. No. You know?
You don't.
So there's definitely got to be a little bit of a trial and an error.
Absolutely.
You know, to figure out what it is that really makes you tick. You know, what gives you...
Nothing in your life is off the table. Once you get sober, nothing in your life's off the table when it comes to exploring passion and exploring the different facets of... I don't know, just enjoying life and finding those little tiny things that you draw inspiration from. Because I don't have one big thing in my life that I would say is like, this is the thing that really pushes me to do whatever. It's all the little things.
Oh, absolutely.
Little tiny things.
I think you would be not in the greatest position if you had one major thing, because that doesn't tend to work. You need to have like, you know, half a dozen things, I'd say at least, that like really keep you grounded and get the blood flowing, you know. And so like obviously like the meetings, steps, sponsor, all that stuff, that's like, you know, its own thing for sure, and that's a solid thing to have, but you know, it's, you know, you're that's like a foundation. You know, and it's like if you don't build on top of that, you know, you're not getting all the rewards that are available to, you know, recovery.
Don't be afraid to build on the foundation either.
Exactly.
I find also that people in the rooms will just keep hammering the same nails into the same foundation over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with keeping it green. You know what I mean? Like, we have to keep it available in our minds. But when the fear comes up of like, do I put myself out in a spiritual way or in a personal way to reach out to something that's not something I've ever done before, or something that maybe I used to have a predisposed idea about or even a resentment towards, you if you put yourself out there to figure those things out, you're only going to get answers that are going to help you progress forward. And it may look like a shut door.
Yeah.
But at least at that point, I've learned that shut doors and mistakes and things that I've done are only catalysts to the inevitable next big victory or next even small victory, but even the next beautiful thing that's going to come across. So,
yeah, another thing I've noticed is we tend to kind of cling to like one form of self-development and kind of like let others fall to the wayside. Right?
Yes.
Yeah, and that's like, if you were building a house, you wouldn't like build one room at a time and then deck it out with decorations and all this different furniture and stuff when there's still like half-built rooms,
right,
across the hallway. It's like you gotta bring it from the ground up. You need to work on everything, and then
you need infrastructure.
Yeah. But it's like that's a tricky one because I do that all the time.
Yeah.
It's like I'm like super willing to work on one aspect of my life. Like right now, the area of focus for me is financial amends, and so I'm like super focused on that, super motivated to do all that, but like there's probably so many other things that's falling to the wayside in the process,
But that is a part of the journey, though. That's a part of it.
Yeah.
It's a part of the journey of moderation, which I really have always been a big opposition person of balance and moderation to an extent in the early years of my sobriety, because I was like, balance is a made up word, and moderation isn't something I'm good at, obviously. But I think the steps and good sponsorship and stuff like that helps you to, and having good friends, you know what I mean, helps you to understand and come to a place where balance isn't so scary and moderation isn't so out of reach in all other aspects of your life. Even the book talks about that even a person seemingly normal in every other respect being able to take care of their business and do everything, the catalyst comes to the symptoms that arise out of taking a drink or a drug, right? And then all of it falls apart. But at a specific point, that ism can stretch into other parts of your life. So at that point, it's going in and recognizing that ism when you see it, and taking the necessary steps. Because there's always going to be stuff you're going to need to work on, Rob. There's always going to be things that are not getting as much attention, something that's getting too much attention, or whatever. It's having the mind to slow down and stop and say, where am I at right now? Am I feeling a sense of, I don't know, like, humility is such a great word for that. Like, because the way I've described it is a feeling of being small but not insignificant. I think you've probably heard me say that.
Yeah.
Because if you can back off and kind of view the world from a bird's eye view, and see everything's going okay, and like all the things that you have going on in your life, you can only take one brick out of the truck at one time.
Yeah.
There's no way you can take them all. And those are those little things that you become okay with the stream of life. You become okay with where you are inherently, if you can do that. Now, it comes and goes. I live in the fourth dimension. I'm out of the fourth dimension. I'm in the present. I'm out of the present. You know what I mean? It's just, I think that's just humanity in general because of outside sources, desires that are run rampant and things like that. But again, that's my opinion. I don't know. I had a whole nother thing about like meta narratives, which is a crazy topic, but we might be able to do that some other time. Because it coincides with this topic. It's just like learned behaviors that you get from early childhood or from like romance relationships or friend groups that kind of like develop the way you see the world. And that goes a lot with the opposite side of self-discovery and living in a false perception.
Yeah, I'm actually reading a book right now called The Denial of Death by
Mm-hmm.
Ernest Becker. He was a student of Sigmund Freud, and the book is basically about how a lot of our personality is developed in childhood as a defense mechanism, as a way to repress the anxiety that is caused by the fear of death that is like inherent in every human being.
Yeah.
It's an interesting read. There's certain parts of it where I kind of like question a little bit, but there's definitely some uncomfortable topics as well in there, because Freud he is ruthless when it comes to that stuff. Like he will not hesitate to talk about like your parents' genitals
He don't pull
in great
punches,
detail.
That guy's crazy.
Yeah, so it's definitely uncomfortable at certain times, but it's made for an interesting read. I think I might do a video on it eventually.
I think we could, and I would love to sit down and do more topics like this. But I think like the main takeaway from this is like enjoy the journey, because it's only going to happen. From my understanding right now, it's only going to happen once this way.
Yeah.
This way, and depriving yourself of the tiny moments that really make life worthwhile, whether it's just connecting with somebody or the absence of your mind running rampant, being able to sit in peace, is something that when I talk to my friends that are relapsers or anybody that relapses, that's out of all the things that they lost, the thing that they always tell me that's the most depressing for them is the loss of just being able to sit at peace with themselves.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you nailed it, because like a lot of times I look for these like giant things to happen, like these huge revelations, like in these like crazy cataclysm type of moments. And like it's not that those don't happen, they're just kind of rare, but oftentimes like the vital spiritual experience I need to like rejuvenate my whole recovery, my whole life, is like seen in the little things. Like just something clicks, like you're looking at something completely unrelated to this topic, and it just like you kind of draw a parallel between the two things.
It's awareness. Awareness is one of the best and worst gifts that you get.
Yeah.
You become aware of all the cool things, but you also become aware of all the little annoyances and stuff that you do. But be kind to yourself, and a prayer without action is just a wish. So we try to move forward in whatever little way we can. If you have a whole bunch of stuff going on in your life right now, and you don't know how to solve it, take one thing. My sponsors just told me recently, he's like, take one thing and try to do that one thing and get yourself back on track. All it's going to take is that one little thing, that one little victory.
Yeah.
That one little push.
Exactly. Yep. All right. Well, I feel like that was a good session.
Thanks for having me, Rob.
Yes, thanks for coming out, man. That was great, and that was a good time, and I'll see you guys next time.